Good evening, all. Let us wait for a couple of minutes for a few folks to join. I am Uma, working as a senior consultant quality analyst at Thoughtworks, experienced in automation covering both front end and back end. Now I would request Charu to introduce herself. Over to you, Charu.
Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast session. I'm Charu. I'm working as a senior consultant quality analyst and I have 8 years of industry experience with various types of testing, functional, non-functional automation and with various domains. So before we start and deep dive into the event today, let's do a small poll just to check like how many of you have used Appium 2 before. Yeah.
Okay, we'll end the poll now.
Yeah. So welcome aboard, people. Looking forward to great learning together.
Yeah, we can see few of them have answered as yes and no. No worries. Today we can know more about EPM2. And now we can see like most of them have joined. Okay, very good evening, one and all. We welcome you all to the vodQA Shorts Bangalore. It is great to have you all joining us in spite of your busy schedule on the weekday. And we hope that like there'll be a good takeaways after the session. For the folks who are joining this session for the first time, vodQA stands for Value-Oriented Discussion for Quality Analysts. This provides a unique platform for testing enthusiasts to come together, share, collaborate, and discuss on various trends and technologies. Today, we have quite an interesting topic in our workshop, that is build Appium 2 drivers and plugins. Today, we also have like extremely talented people with us who are actively contributing in our QA community with various open source projects, tech talks, blogs. Now I would request our speakers to introduce themselves. Over to you, Sai.
Hey, thank you. I will share my screen. Give me a second. I have an ultra wide monitor. Okay, so I just try to crop only a bit of it. So what is required is scene press. Okay.
Better.
What is it? It's good now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Like Uma said, we're gonna talk about Appium 2 and and we're not gonna jump in a lot into Appium 2 in this session. So Srini, myself, and Rakshita, as a part of this workshop, we're gonna talk about Appium 2's architecture. What is the changes which has happened from 1 to 2? Definitely want to do that, and also we're gonna do a hands-on to on how you want to build a plugin, right? So that's a new thing in 2.0. So this workshop is all about how you can build a plugin from scratch. So what is a plugin? What is the need of a plugin, and how we can build a plugin? So that's what we're going to take a look at it. And before we jump into all of this interesting topic, I want to start off with myself. And Sai. I work for Thoughtworks as a lead consultant. And apart from me, being a consultant at Thoughtworks, I'm also quite active in open source. So when I started my career as a analyst, I learned a lot from the community. So I want to give back all that what I learned from the community back. And one way I chose to do that is open source. And I present in a lot of conferences. I do some tech blogging. I'm also a panelist in few conferences as well. Yeah, that's about me. And over to you, Srini.
Hi everyone, myself Srini, and I have around 11 years of experience, out of which 6 years in Thoughtworks, and have played different roles. QA, predominantly QA, have played role as a full stack developer as well, and also have played a bit of role on other, program manager as well at times. So I'm also an open source contributor and maintainer of Appium and contributions to Selenium, WebDriver.io, and a lot more open source repositories. And I pair a lot with Sai on open source, conference speaking, and blogging, and a lot more on that. And that's me. And these are my Twitter and GitHub handles. So if you have any queries, feel free to reach us. And over to you, Rakshita.
Thanks, Srini. Hi, all. I'm a consultant, Rakshita from Thoughtworks, and it's been 2 years since I started my journey here, and have little experience on mobile web NFR testing. So yeah, really passionate about learning new things and exploring. So yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rakshita. Hey, Shini, one call out.
Yeah.
Before we get in right, just a call out over here to everyone in this group. The content or whatever we're going to talk today, right, as a part of the workshop, is something very little you would find over the internet, because Appium 2 is very new and not much documentation. People are not talking a lot about it and things. So if you have, and that's the whole reason of this workshop, not being in a webinar mode, and everyone can unmute yourself and ask us any questions. Don't feel this question could be a silly one. No question is silly. So this is complete safe space for you to unmute yourself, ask us any question, and ask us to repeat as many times as possible, because we are here to learn as a group. So we want to start off with that note, and let's jump in now.
Cool. Honestly, we are gonna write hello world today. Let's write it together. And Appium has been in the market for quite some time. I think I remember I think myself and Stai have started Appium probably 7-8 years back. So it's been there in the market, and a lot of 1.x versions have came out, and 2.x has been in talks. I remember the first time Jonathan has introduced there is going to be a 2 version very soon. I think it's been 3-4 years. Pandemic itself has closed, and we are still overhauling a lot of things. So and also it's keep on changing. So we also talked about building plugins last year in Selenium Conf. And if you take the same video and if you look at it, it's going to be a little different from what we are going to talk now. So there's going to be day in, day out changes to make things better for community. That's the reason it's still in beta, and it's going to get launched anytime soon. We are overhauling the final bits of documentation and improving our plugin support. What is that plugin is all about? So let's go inside and see what does Appium 2 brings in, right? Why Appium 2 before that, right? So Appium 2, you might have installed Appium. It might have installed a lot of bunch of unwanted things for you. For example, if you have installed Appium 1.x some time ago, probably you might have seen Selendroid driver. I have seen Selendroid driver been installing in my PC for almost 7 years. I have never ever used that. I don't know what is it doing, honestly, right? And if I'm installing, let's say I wanted to test only iOS, it does install a lot of other things which I don't use at all, right? For example, it does install UA Automator 2 driver, which we don't install, which is not necessary for me at that moment in time, because my tests are going to be on iOS application. Nothing related to Android makes sense to be installed in my machine, right? So first, that is the freedom that it gives you. Appium 2 gives us the freedom that if you want to install a particular driver, you could install that. You can restrict all the other things that gets installed on your machine. Let's say you wanted to automate iOS today, so you could install that iOS specific stuffs, and you don't want to care about don't care about Android for now. And tomorrow, if your application and the test is getting supported in Android, so you could install Android driver at that moment in time. So it gives you that flexibility. And next thing is, if you raise a bug, let's say things comes up, Appium gets evolved, we do bug fixes a lot, and it gets released every versions, right? You have to wait for that stable release to come out so that you could use. For example, let's say there is a minor fix on Android on something. So you have to wait for the complete Appium server to come out so that you could use it. So there is a wait time there, right? So here in Appium 2, everything is decoupled. So Appium server is just a bare metal, does nothing except routing. So Appium 2, if you install Appium 2, it just installs a bare minimum stuff. It doesn't install, and with that, you can't do anything, right? So if you want to install a specific driver, you could install on top of it. And that's the flexibility that it gives you. So one of the advantage of doing that is if Android make a fix, they release Android driver. So you could update just Android driver in moments in time and use that, which means the bug fixing wait time is going to be very short. And then we are talking about plugins, right? What is the plugins all about, right? So you might have seen, if you have used WebDriver IO, if you have used other tools available in market for quite some time, you might have used a lot of services from WebDriver IO, like visual regression service, like Applitool service. You might have used SAS Lab service, right? These are all the plugins or the services that WebDriver IO gives to the community. Probably some of these things are built by community, some of these things are not built by community. You could still use that along with WebDriver IO, right? So that's the same thought that we would like to enhance our community folks to solve their problems without much of hassle with Appium, right? If you solve some problem, let's say one of the problem that me and Sai faced was about automating a particular device, WebOS or kind of a device. So we have to create our own drivers for it. So if I have to create my own drivers, I have to keep on nudging Appium core members to change certain bits on their code. In 1.x world, I have to do all of these things so that I could build a driver. Appium also has to release their own version of server with these patches so that they could build a driver, right? So with Appium 2, building a driver, building a plugin. Okay, again, what is plugin is all about. I will come to that. Building a driver is going to be very easy because we have decoupled all of those bits, right? So anyone can build a driver, release it to community. They can maintain their own versions for it, and Appium will still work if you just say, "Hey, Appium, can you start your server along with this driver?" And it will does the job for you, right? So that's how flexible Appium has become in Appium 2 beta, and beta has been there in the market for quite some time, right? So what is Appium plugins? We have talked about Appium server, Appium 2, what all flexibilities that it brings to the table, right? What is Appium plugin, right? It's a small piece of code that you could introduce in your Appium command. Appium command can be something like a find element, or it could be something like getting a text, or it could be something like clicking on an element. So these are all Appium commands similar to the same WebDriver commands, right? So you can change the behavior of Appium command. So let's say I wanted to enhance my server to, let's say I have a problem statement. I want to introduce my own command without disturbing the list of commands that Appium gives, right? You could do that, right? Before we get there, how to create one ourselves and what all opportunities that a user can create, what all use cases and opportunities that user can create a plugin. You could for now just take it as a small piece of code that you can maintain it yourself. It runs along with server to do to solve a smaller problem statement, right? It could be something like, let's say I wanted to take a screenshot whenever a command gets executed. Whenever there is a find element, I want to take a screenshot. Whenever there is something else, I want to take a screenshot. So everywhere on your client code, you might do driver.screenshot as screenshot as screenshot as. It will become so clumsy, right? What if you extract that out and give it to server within a small piece of code, and server does it for you? So your code will still look as driver.find element, click, so and so, right? It will look so neat, right? So let's get deeper. How does all of these pieces, drivers, server, I talked about client piece of code, all of these get works together, right? So we'll see what does Appium's architecture in 2.0 world looks like, right? So let's get into and see how these moving pieces work together.
Sure. Srini, before we jump into the architecture, right? I'll try to summarize what you explained on
Sure.
why Appium 2.0 drivers and plugins and use cases, right? What I understand from you mentioning about why Appium 2 is because it is quite minimalistic now. So which means whatever it idea I can I put it this way, Srini? What you ask is what you get from Appium, correct?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. That's one of the key things of 2.0, right? And with drivers, like you said, previously with one, if you want to automate something really different to what Appium supports, like Appium supports Android, iOS, and Mac and Windows, right? But let's say you want to automate a WebOS TV, right? Or you want to automate your Xbox or PS4, 5, or probably you can also think about you want to automate your Raspberry Pi. So in those cases, in one, we'll have to somewhere understand the core modules and like sort of get things merged within the Appium 1.x core, right? But with two, you're saying that we don't have to do that. We are completely decoupled, where you can build your own drivers and then we can maintain it, and then we can just plug it to the Appium server, correct?
Exactly.
And with Appium plugins are again something which can get merged with Appium server, which is again independently, which is isolated from the core, where one can actually modify or add new commands into Appium server, correct, Srini?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'll give a pause here to see if anyone's got any questions. We don't have to, we don't have to wait till the end of the session for the questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask us the questions there and then. No questions? Okay, so I believe you're good then. So let's jump into the architecture part, Srini.
So we all have started probably you might have done new WebDriver. So basically you do a WebDriver initialization in your client code, right? Probably in Java or probably in JavaScript or in Python, any languages that Appium supports. Appium does supports have client libraries on client bindings on all the major languages that we all use, right? So you might have initialized a WebDriver and then you would have find an element similar to Appium, similar to Selenium. You would have initialized a driver, then you would have found an element, perform some action on it, and then you quit the driver, right? So these are the at least bare minimum things that you would have wrote in Selenium. Same way in Appium, you would have wrote the same thing. Instead of saying Chrome driver, you would have said Android driver or iOS driver, right? So the small piece of code that you write is called client code that has to interact with your mobile application under test, which is there in your Android mobile or in your emulator that is running in your machine, right? So the client code has to interact with your application under test, right? In between comes the picture of Appium server. Appium server is built on Node.js. It has client server architecture. So client is the language bindings that you wrote, driver.find element, driver.wait, capture screenshot, so many things, right? So it does talks to Appium server, which is up and running. It is an Express.js server up and running on your machine. You start it, you install it, start it. And you would have said while initializing a driver, you would have said, okay, these are the capabilities that I wanted to say. This is where my application location is in my machine. This is the driver that I am going to use. And this is the package name. So many capabilities you would have given. So Appium server kinds of understands it, deserializes it. So all this communication happens in a protocol called WebDriver protocol, which is a W3C standard, which means this is a spec that is present, authorized by someone as a community, and you could build on top of it. So Appium and Selenium are implementations of WebDriver protocol or WebDriver spec, right? Someone has wrote the spec. This is how a find element will look like. This is how a click will look like. This is the arguments that you need to pass, and that's the specification. And Appium and Selenium are implementations of it. So Appium uses WebDriver protocol. Client talks to server in a WebDriver protocol, right? When you say new Android driver, Server gets that command. It understands, oh, it's going to be Android driver, and he says the path of the application under test is here. So it understands from the capabilities. Appium server understands from the capabilities and initializes. You would have said while saying Android driver, you might have also said the automation backend that I wanted to use. It could be UI automator or it could be an espresso backend. So Google provides two backends, and one is UI automated to another one is espresso, which you could see the symbol there, right? So for the picture here, we have taken espresso. So I have said espresso. Let's say the automation name is espresso in my capability. So Appium server understands that capability, creates a driver session, also installs another server on your application, on your device. So you see there is on the right side, you see there is a server, espresso server inside your device, right? So we have two servers up and running, and I have one client which has two servers which talks to Appium server. Appium server talks to Appium driver, which creates a session with Appium's espresso server here running inside the device, right? So there are two servers here. If you have installed and ran Appium tests in past, go forward, see in settings, go to navigate to applications that gets installed on your machine. Apart from the application under test, you will also find either UI Automator 2 or Espresso server installed as an application inside your mobile, right? Probably after some time when you are running it, you can also see that. So the command gets passed to server, server sends that command to driver, driver sends that command to server, which is running inside your device. And that server knows how to talk to application under test in the language that application under test understands. So whichever language that you write a test in client can get translated into language that my application under test understands through the server, which is running inside your mobile device, right? So this is how a normal connection happens in 2.0 architecture. So you tell a command, server understands it, it pass it over to driver, and server request will pass it over to driver, will pass it over to server, which is running inside your device, and it talks to application under test and performs that action. So it's straightforward, right? Let's say I wanted to introduce this small piece of code called plugin, which can lie together with, sit together with Appium server. And you also have to activate that plugin when you wanted to, you also have to activate that plugin when you wanted to start a server, because server should know, hey, this is the plugin that I wanted to use. Can you activate it? Then server will activate it. How does it gets activated? We will see in minutes of time, right? So a plugin, Appium server will talk to plugin. So you registered that plugin to Appium server. So for such, let's say you introduced a small piece of code called XYZ. Client asks for XYZ. Oh, server now understands that my espresso driver don't have this XYZ. So I have to talk to plugin, which gets registered. So it sends the command to plugin. Plugin will send the command to espresso server running inside your application, running inside your device. And it sends the response back to, the plugin will send the request and the response will be sent back from server to your plugin. Plugin will send that response back to your Appium server after doing that XYZ operation. This XYZ operation it's something, let's understand, saying as it's not present in Appium, you introduced it newly, right? So plugin will send that response, Appium server will send that response back to client in the same W3C format. So where can I use this plugin? Can I use this plugin only for building something which Appium doesn't have? No, it's not the only use case. There are 3 use cases or 4 use cases that Appium plugins are helpful for. First one is the one that I've said. You introduce a new functionality to Appium, you could use it. And next one, I wanted to alter the behavior of an Appium command. Let's say I wanted to alter the behavior of an Appium command called find element. Right? So I wanted to change how Appium find element does. So you could implement your own find element and instead of driver, espresso driver talking to server, the plugin that you built handles the find element will talk to server. And you can also do something before and after the command. Let's say I don't want to implement find element completely, but I wanted to take screenshot whenever find element gets called, right? So in that case, plugin will just do a screenshot and then hand over the responsibility back to driver. It will take the screenshot for you and then, it will find the element for you and then come back to you, right? So you could see that arrows that goes. So server will tell, okay, find element is handled by plugin. So request is passed to find element. So plugin will just do a screenshot and then send it to driver, and driver will do the remaining finding of element. And then response come back from server, and then the same way it comes back. And the next thing is probably, let's say, first thing we have seen, have introduced something completely new. And the next thing what we have seen is I'm altering the behavior of Appium command, implementing everything new, altering the existing command. Next is updating the server itself, right? So I wanted to, let's say, update the server object when I wanted to send something. Let's say I wanted to, Sai, do you have an example for it?
Yeah, Srini, I'm thinking updating the existing object, right? Yeah. I can give an example. Okay. So let's say, right, generally in our cases, there are certain default capabilities we give, right? Like you give automation name, you give an app path, and you also give a platform name, right? So let's say now this goes as an object from your client to the server. But let's say you build a plugin where you're only taking the object and you want to update that object, probably as a part of those 3 or 4 capabilities, you want to add another 5 more capabilities, right? So you can alter that object and then send that object back to the driver and to the server.
Yeah, right. These are the ways or the opportunities that you could use or build a plugin for yourself, or probably open source it, and then start. You're not going to change anything in respect to Appium. I'm saying that you're not going to change anything in the code base of Appium. All of these you could do it yourself and release it to community and still use Appium server. And probably, let's say Appium has its own releases and your plugins have its own versions of it, and you could maintain everything without touching anything in the Appium code base itself. So this is the opportunity that Appium kind of gives us in Appium plugins as a concept. Any questions before we go to the next? Any questions? If you don't understand, feel free to stop us. We can absolutely repeat everything.
Yeah. Can we consider like everyone in this group have actually understood how the flow gets into the architecture? You could unmute yourself. Like I started with a disclaimer, right? So I think if the session is a little interactive, I think we can do a lot better in the workshop. Okay, Srini, I think people are okay. They don't have any doubts, so maybe we can move forward.
Cool. Let's move on. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Cool. Just to recap here, the 3 concepts where you could introduce a plugin or a need. Okay, I see there is hands up. Yeah, please go ahead. Do you have any questions? Or is it by mistake? Okay, it's like by mistake. And if you still have questions, feel free to stop us at any time. We'll definitely take up questions in between. So quick recap. These are the opportunities that Appium kinds of provides to community to build plugins. So you could introduce your own command into Appium's lifecycle. Next, you can alter the existing Appium commands. Commands could be find element, so and so, so and so. You have a lot of commands, right? Driver.feed, find element, creating a session, click, so and so. You could alter and do all of those things. And the third one is about updating the Appium server object before it starts listening for the request, right? So what are different use cases, right? We have talked about this, when to use where, all of these, right? Let's say I wanted to take a screenshot before and after find element. So you could, in that case, you have to alter the existing command. Let's say you wanted to introduce a new command altogether. So the command could be something like, you wanted to have a separate Appium command to give you crash logs of Android. I don't want it to be a capability, but whenever I ask Appium driver to give me a crash log, whenever, I mean, on demand basis, whenever I ask for it, I get it. So it's a new command altogether, right? You could build a new command, register that command with Appium server, and then use that command in your client code without changing anything in existing Appium server. I mean, without changing the Appium server code or the client code that you might be using, right? You could do all of these things, right? So likewise, there are a lot of use cases that you could solve using Appium plugins. One of the use case that we wanted to solve now is altering the existing command. So we are going to alter the existing command. Rakshita is going to take us through how one can alter. And before that, we are going to see what all I have to do if I have to build a plugin. A quick note about what all I have to do if I have to change or build a new plugin, right? So we will do all of these things live.